Shabbat Shalom, everybody. So most of the Torah up until this point has been filled with narrative, with story. Last week we stood at the foot of Mount Sinai and entered into the Brit, the covenant with God, synthesizing our identity as a people and laying the groundwork for our spiritual destiny. This week we take a turn into law. However, we are not on the other side of Revelation. We are smack dab in the middle of Revelation. Parshat Mishpatim is filled with laws and rules to govern a just society. The rights of enslaved people or indentured servants, how to treat orphans and widows, how to adjudicate cases of murder and theft, and more. Although not all of the laws explicated here feel compassionate to our modern ears, we recognize that underlying the biblical project runs a current of rachamim, of deep, deep compassion. The Torah represents a departure from the ancient Near Eastern culture in which it emerged, and a radically new way of envisioning and building a society on justice, not power, in which the vulnerable among us are protected. Our parsha begins, Ve'ele hamishpatim asher tasim lefanechem. These are the rules which you shall set before them. Rashi notes that when the Bible wants to start a new subject, the word ele, these are, is used. However, here the Torah uses the word ve'ele, and these are, leading Rashi to see this as a continuation of what preceded it, of adding something new to the previous verses rather than starting a brand new subject. So, what were the previous verses? Well, if you turn back a few pages to the end of Repro, the portion we read last week, you will see that in the psukim, in the verses preceding, we were in the midst of instructions for building an altar to worship God. What's the significance of the juxtaposition of these verses? What's the relationship between altars and laws? Rashi asks, why is this section dealing with civil laws placed immediately after that, commanding the making of the altar? Rashi answers, to tell you that you should seat the Sanhedrin, the court, in the vicinity of the temple. What's that all about? Rabbi David Hoffman notes that placing the courts near the temple reminds us that adjudicating civil claims is a religious activity, a form of divine service. Sacrifices, or for us contemporaries, prayer, are avodah, as Adam pointed to earlier in the Torah reading. But the argument goes here, so is the work of the courts. Laws that govern us, that protect us, are a type of divine service and reflective of the kind of compassion that underlies true justice. We read, for example, in Mishpatim, if you take your neighbor's garment in pledge, you must return it to him before the sun sets. It's his only available clothing. It's what covers his skin. What else shall he sleep in? Therefore, if that person cries out to me, says God, I will pay heed, for I am compassionate. God, the lawgiver, is Rahum Vechanun, compassionate and gracious. This week has been designated Repro Shabbat by the National Council of Jewish Women, because Parshat Mishpatim is the portion in which we read the verses in Exodus 21 from which the rabbis of the Talmud created laws about abortion. More on that in a moment. Judaism allows for the possibility of abortion precisely because Judaism is obsessed with life. This week, we faced the unimaginable losses, as I noted earlier, of Kafir and Ariel Bibas, in addition, of course, to their mother, Shiri, and Oded. These abominable acts horrify every human being who is paying attention. But for parents, we need to acknowledge that it strikes a particular chord. No matter how old your children are, you remember how it felt to hold them when they were 10 months old, when they were 4 years old. Parents' most natural instinct is to protect our children. The human drive to bear children, coupled with the instinct to nurture and protect our children, means that the decision to terminate a pregnancy is never something that is taken lightly. The rabbis of the Talmud did not shy away from the most personal and intimate details of our lives, affirming that Judaism can and should provide a blueprint for individuals and societies that we can live by. The Jewish conversation about abortion, grounded in our traditional sacred texts, does not neatly correspond to our contemporary American conversation, which hinges on questions about choice and freedom for some, and on protecting the rights of the unborn fetus for others. Jewishly speaking, when confronting whether or not to terminate a pregnancy, the most important question is, what is the most life-affirming choice? For the rabbis of the Talmud, the life of the pregnant person is paramount. Where did they ground this principle in Torah? For starters, right here in our Parsha. We learn in Exodus 21:12 that if you kill a person, you're liable for death. A few verses later, we read, when men fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results but no other damage, the one responsible shall be fined according to as the woman's husband may exact from him, the payment based on reckoning. But if other damage ensues, the penalty shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, etc. So when people fight and a miscarriage results, the damage is a fine. The Bible is sparse in its detail, which prevents it from actually serving as a legal code. Generations of rabbis and legal scholars have pored over it in order to extrapolate principles to make law. Thus, the rabbis of the Talmud specified that if someone accidentally causes a miscarriage to take place, they are obligated to pay financial reparations only. The case is not treated as manslaughter or murder, which would demand the death penalty according to Torah. The other damage that would demand the death penalty, life for life, would be the death of the pregnant person herself. Thus, causing the termination of a pregnancy is not, for the Torah, considered murder. The Talmud repeatedly affirms that a fetus does not have the legal status of a person. Other significant Talmudic principles regarding abortion are as follows. The full status of personhood begins at viable birth. The fetus is considered part of the woman's body for the first 40 days of pregnancy. And sometimes abortion is mandated in order to save the life of the pregnant person. The rabbis of the Talmud were very explicit about the legal parameters of abortion. This is part of the reason that for many Jews, abortion is not a political issue, but an issue of religious observance and religious freedom. Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg says we fight for abortion justice not despite our religious beliefs, but because of them. The rabbis of the Talmud also built law from a principle they called Lev Yodea Marat Nafsho. The heart knows the bitterness of its soul. So, for example, when discussing the rules of fasting on Yom Kippur, the rabbis consider the case of someone who is ill. How do you decide when someone is too ill to fast on Yom Kippur? The Talmud invokes a verse from the book of Proverbs. Lev Yodea Marat Nafsho. The heart knows the bitterness of its soul, to teach that the sick person himself is actually the expert who should make the decision, not a doctor. The Talmud says that nobody can possess more expertise on this question than the person himself. We apply the same principle to the question of abortion, asking again in any given situation, what is the most life-affirming choice and who gets to make that choice? The person going through the experience. Rabbi Sarah Horowitz says, it's no coincidence that the Hebrew word for womb is rechem, of course, leading to the word rachamim, compassion. When it comes to wombs, when it comes to the decision of how to build or not build a family, we need to operate from a place of understanding and compassion. That is why the rabbis also said that the biblical injunction, the commandment to be fruitful and multiply, only applies to men, recognizing that being pregnant carries with it risks and should never be something that someone does under duress or force. There is no law without story, says Rabbi Aviva Richman. Midrash, the stories that fill in the gaps of our biblical text, help the rabbis to understand how law impacts and shapes people's lives. Story continues to help us today as we navigate the question about how to make the most life-affirming choices in our own lives and how to support others to do the same. 1 in 4 women will terminate a pregnancy before the age of 45. Clearly, that includes people in our own community. So many stories about this go untold because of stigma. Our community, we hope, is a place where anyone who's terminated a pregnancy feels welcomed and cherished. We all have personal stories that include fertility difficulties, pregnancy losses, and other reproductive health challenges. In closing, I want to return to Rashi's prescient and astute comment. Why in the Torah is the section dealing with civil laws placed immediately after that commanding the making of an altar? To tell us that we should seat the court in the vicinity of the temple. Adjudicating law is a religious activity, a form of divine service. Laws that govern us, that protect us, are a type of divine service and reflective of the kind of compassion that underlies true justice. We pray that we find our way forward using compassion as our roadmap and find the strength to honor life in all of the choices that we make, big and small, in order to make our lives a blessing. Shabbat Shalom.